Hi everybody, welcome to Ned Rocks. So, yeah, the Nedcast. Um, what I was going to talk about today was phosphate rock. Um, I, Unfortunately, I'm not sure I have it. I'm not sure that I have as big of a story as I thought I did, but okay, well, let's just run with it, okay. So, phosphate rock. Uh, so So the standard fertilizers that people buy, you go down to, you know, some garden center or whatever, buy a bag of fertilizer. You end up with it's this stuff called NPK. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So nitrogen, of course, is captured out of the air. Um, Phosphorus and potassium are mined. Um, Potassium is fairly common. It's not um, super common, but it's there's a lot of potassium out there. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is it's pretty. I don't know if it's. Yeah, I guess you'd have to say it's pretty rare. Phosphorus is the limiting factor in most like biological systems. So generally you increase the phosphorus, and that's how you get more production. Um, so yeah, NPK, phosphorus. Now, okay, back in the old days, I was involved in the whole peak oil idea. Peak oil. So oil was gonna, run out of oil. It's like we're gonna increase production and then peak and then go down. So this would be the production per year over time. Um, it was very popular, like around 2006, 2007, on the internet. So didn't exactly happen. I mean, they found some other sources of oil. Uh, fracking and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's subject for another show. But it's not just oil that's limited though. That's one of the things that all those peak oil guys were talking about. Is that there are other important uh, resources that are limited and that may also peak if we use them up. So that's what first got me interested in phosphorus. Um, so phosphate rock is mined a bunch of different places, especially in Florida. Uh, um, I think Florida leads, yeah, of the states, of the 50 states, I think Florida leads these nation in production of phosphates. Now, now there are other countries that have very abundant phosphate resources. I'm thinking of Morocco, especially, but in the United States, Florida is pretty much it. Well, see, the thing is, there's this very, very massive formation of phosphate rocks out in like Idaho called the Phosphoria Formation, but um, it's not. So the Phosphoria Formation isn't economical to mine at this point, at least not on the scale that it is in Florida. So it's not. I mean, the phosphorus, I guess, is just not at a high enough concentration out there. So I don't know. Maybe after we've dug up all the phosphorus in Florida, maybe we'll head out to Idaho. I don't know what's going to happen. Now, the quantity of phosphorus is much higher out there, but it's more dilute. And anyway, so the reason I was going to use this as a topic for the show is the question of how exactly these phosphate rocks form has vexed me for a long time. And I was reading, on the internet, and I found something that, to me, really just blew it wide open. I was like, wow, that's it. That's it. That's wow, they formed. But, the more I think about it, the less sure I am about it. So, okay, so why is phosphate rock so isolated? Why is it found in these very, very large concentrations in somewhat limited areas like Morocco or Florida? Because phosphorus, there's dissolved phosphorus in the ocean, so you'd think it would precipitate out like a whole bunch of different places, but it doesn't appear to do that. It appears to only precipitate out in some very limited places. So, why is that? And so, I read this article. It was published 2005 by Schultz and Schultz. It was large sulfur bacteria and something like large sulfur bacteria and the formation of phosphorite, I believe was the name of the article. And so it's a really interesting idea. So there are these little bacteria and form these neat little chains called Thiomargarita namibensis. And so what they do is they actually accumulate polyphosphate. So, and that's such an interesting thing, polyphosphate. So instead of having a simple phosphate like phosphate rock, you've got like CaPO4 or something like that, Ca3PO4 5OH, let's say. I think that's hydroxyapatite. But it's pretty simple. You get calcium and you get phosphorus, but polyphosphate is where you've got these long strings of phosphate groups. So you've got, P, something like this. I'm not like a organic chemist, so don't quote me on this stuff. But anyway, so the basic idea is, so they're called large sulfur bacteria. So in addition to accumulating polyphosphate, they also accumulate sulfur. And so the theory is that they can oxidize hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is produced by bacteria if you've got, let's suppose you get the bottom of the ocean and there's a whole bunch of stuff growing on top of it, so it's a very, very, there's a very abundant productivity in the ocean for whatever reason, well, there's plenty of phosphate, but phosphate and nitrogen and all that kind of stuff. So it falls to the bottom, right? And so at the bottom, there are bacteria that will eat up the stuff that falls to the bottom. And because there's so it'll quickly consume all the dissolved oxygen. The dissolved oxygen will be gone. So, well, how are you, the decomposers that are down there, little bacteria and whatnot that's eating all that stuff, how's it gonna make a living, So, there's no oxygen. So, what it does is it produces, so there are these bacteria that will actually reduce sulfate, SO4. These sulfate ions are pretty common in the ocean, I believe. Chloride is the most common anion, but sulfate, I believe, is the second most common anion. So there's no sort of shortage of sulfur in the ocean. It's just that it's all oxidized. So what these bacteria do is they take this sulfate that's just around, and they reduce it to sulfide. So, you've got some H2S to hydrogen sulfide, and that way they're able to eat, all of that yummy stuff. At least they think it's yummy. I mean, I probably wouldn't, but good God, it's probably pretty nasty stuff, but that's what they do. So, so anyway, so there's this hydrogen sulfide that's produced at the bottom, and so, basic idea is that these little Thiomargarita namavensis, it will actually eat the hydrogen sulfide, and then it will it'll oxidize the hydrogen sulfide to elemental sulfur, right? And that's how it'll get energy. But so the thing is, though, it's right there above the sulfate reducing bacteria that's producing this stuff. There's not a lot of oxygen down there. So the theory is that it stores, in fact, it stores oxygen in a number of different ways. One of the ways that it stores oxygen is in the form of nitrate. So it'll store nitrate that it'll use to oxidize the sulfur. The sulfide. But it'll also store this polyphosphate, and so after it's used up all of the nitrogen, all of the nitrate that it can, it will switch to the polyphosphate. So it will oxidize the sulfur by converting this polyphosphate back into phosphate. So it'll convert the polyphosphate back into good old-fashioned phosphate. The really simple stuff. So, and then what does it do with the phosphate? Well, the phosphate is we exhale carbon dioxide. The phosphate is basically what it exhales. So it just, lets it go. And the basic idea is that when it releases all of this phosphate, you get this massive accumulation of phosphorus, this massive accumulation of phosphate into the pores in between the bacteria, and so because there are these little pores in between the bacteria, it will actually precipitate phosphate rock. So the theory is, anyway, of Schultz and Schultz, that this is how phosphate precipitates out of the ocean. Now, when I read it, I was like, whoa, that is big, man. That is big. That's why there's so much, phosphate formation, phosphate rock formation is so limited in extent. That's why there's so much of it in Florida. There's so much of it in Morocco, is because it's not so much that there were limited, strange geological conditions, but ecological conditions. You get these pretty unique ecological conditions that allow this Thiomargarita to thrive, and boom, lots of phosphate precipitation. unfortunately, the more I was thinking about it, the less necessary I was thinking that it is for phosphate formation. So, the phosphate formation happens, in phosphorite formation. I mean, phosphate rock formation happens in areas where there's a lot of there's a lot of deep water upwelling. So you've got these currents that are upwelling, that this deep phosphorus-rich water is coming back up to the surface, and so. Well, and so I started thinking, I was like, well, what does this mean? Well, when this phosphorus-rich water, because it's a very important nutrient, comes to the surface, that'll stimulate the primary productivity. So everything will start growing at the surface. And, of course, grows at the surface, it'll die, everything dies, and it'll fall down to the bottom. So, when the phosphorus all of this organic material that falls to the bottom, there's something down there that's going to eat it. It's going to decompose. So after it decomposes, well, what happens to the phosphorus? The phosphorus is just going to go into the water anyway. So it's not really necessary to have these cute little bacterium. It's too bad, because I kind of wish they were, but I don't know. The more I think about it, the less necessary I think it is. I don't think it's really necessary for it to be there. So essentially what I'm saying is that you might find phosphorite formation, even in areas that don't have this Thiomargarita bacteria. But honestly, I think it wouldn't hurt, so you'd probably see it just about everywhere that you have phosphate rock formation. So, yeah, that's basically my thought process on this. There's something else that kind of occurred to me, though, and that's, think about how strange that is. That these Thiomargarita nemibensis bacteria, so they take two extremely important nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, and they just consume them. I mean, it oxidizes the there's a lot of bacteria that'll oxidize nitrate to nitrogen. It's called denitrifying bacteria. And that's, that's like a part of the nitrogen cycle. But the Thiomargarita, it actually dephosphatizes water. It takes phosphate that, would have been in the biosphere. Things could actually eat it. Well, not eat it, but, plants could use it to grow, because it's a vital nutrient. And it turns it into phosphate rock, which is like geologically stable. It lasts for millions of years, so to me, it makes no sense that it would take phosphorus and nitrate, these two really important nutrients, and it would make them inaccessible. Unless, in some way, that was a part of its strategy, its survival strategy. Well, so why don't we think about this a little more? Because it's like, well, let's suppose that these Thiomargarita didn't take the phosphorus out of the, they didn't actually accumulate polyphosphate in their cells there. Well, what would happen is that presumably the phosphorus would go back into the biosphere, in which case there would be an even greater growth of, you know, material. So the thing is, though, if if there was even more organic material falling on these little fire margaritas, they get buried in it, and so eventually the water column would be completely. It would turn anoxic. There would be no oxygen whatsoever. So, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe that could be part of their evolutionary strategy. Is that they actually remove nutrients from the system to prevent to prevent them from getting buried under all of that carbon. I mean that's pretty speculative at this point. But that's something interesting, I think, to consider. See, the main problem I see with this, though, is that there's a whole bunch of, there's a whole bunch of organic sediments that are deposited. So, I mean, like, things like organic shales. I mean, organic shales are not in short supply. There's a ton of organic shales out there. So if this were true, if this were what's going on, well then how come you wouldn't see, anytime you see an organic shale, you'd see these little Thio Margarita coming in there and going to town and eating up all the phosphate, and all of a sudden it wouldn't be an organic shale anymore. You'd think you would see that happening more often if this were part of its evolutionary strategy. Yeah, so anyway, that's basically my thought process. So I hate to end on such a riddle there. This is a riddle wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a puzzle or whatever it is. Yeah. So anyway, if you have any thoughts, comments, concerns, email me, ned@nedrocks.com. I'm sorry, ned@nedrocks.org. Okay, so go ahead and email me, shoot me an email. If you can shed a light on this conundrum, that would be awesome. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Okay, great. I'm going to post some a correction here, some errata. This is wrong. That's not polyphosphate. Polyphosphate is actually a P. Just a normal phosphate, and then another P connected to the O. So that's polyphosphate. Anyway, I knew what I was doing it. Having the P connected like that wasn't right. But okay, so this is polyphosphate, and this is what's accumulating in the cells of the Thiomargarita namavensis. So, any questions, comments, concerns, shoot me an email, ned@nedrocks.org. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Okay, hey everybody, just one more error. That's not hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite is Ca5. 3. Now that's just one type of phosphate mineral. There are other phosphate minerals in phosphate rocks, especially fluoride instead of the hydroxide there, but that's close enough. It's got calcium, it's got hydrogen, it's got phosphate. So that's pretty much what it is. Okay, so talk to you later. Bye-bye.